Edgar Allan Poe, the man who predicted his own death. Imagine a writer who spent his entire life writing about death, madness, darkness, and mysterious endings. Then, one day, he is found wandering the streets of Baltimore. He is confused. He is wearing clothes that apparently do not belong to him. He cannot properly explain what happened. And only a few days later, Edgar Allan Poe is dead. But here is the strangest part. For years, people have claimed that Poe somehow predicted his own death. Was it a real prediction? A terrifying coincidence? Or is the truth even stranger? Welcome to Rabies Info. Edgar Allan Poe was born in Boston in 1809, and he would eventually become one of the most famous writers in American history. His stories and poems were filled with death, mystery, murder, and psychological horror. He created some of the darkest literature of his time. His famous poem, The Raven, turned him into a literary legend. But Poe's real life was almost as tragic as the stories he wrote. He struggled financially. He lost people close to him. His wife, Virginia, suffered from tuberculosis and died in 1847. Poe himself became increasingly troubled during the final years of his life. Then came October 1849. Poe had been in Richmond, Virginia, and was planning to travel to Philadelphia. But somehow he never reached his destination. Instead, on October 3rd, a man named Joseph Walker found Poe outside a tavern in Baltimore. Poe was in terrible condition. He was confused and unable to clearly explain how he had ended up there. But something else immediately seemed strange. Poe was not wearing the clothes he was known to have been traveling in. He was wearing cheap, ill-fitting clothing. Why? Where were his original clothes? Who had Poe been with? And what had happened to him during the missing days? These questions have never been completely answered. Poe was taken to Washington College Hospital. For several days, doctors tried to save him, but he remained confused. His condition became worse, and on October 7, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe died. He was only 40 years old. Even today, the exact cause of his death remains uncertain. Different theories have suggested alcohol poisoning, disease, brain problems, violence, poisoning, and even an infamous practice known as cooping, in which people were allegedly kidnapped and forced to vote repeatedly during elections. But there is no definitive evidence proving exactly what happened. And this is where the mystery surrounding Poe becomes even more fascinating. Some people believe Poe had somehow foreseen his own death. One reason for this belief comes from his 1838 novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. The story contains a character named Richard Parker who meets a horrifying fate after a shipwreck. Years later, in 1884, a real shipwreck occurred involving the yacht Mignonette. For survivors were left stranded at sea. Eventually, the desperate crew killed and ate a cabin boy named Richard Parker. The name was exactly the same as Poe's fictional character. It sounds almost impossible, but remember, Poe's book was published decades before the real tragedy. Coincidence? Perhaps. But stories like this helped create the legend that Poe somehow possessed a strange ability to predict the future. There is another famous claim surrounding his death. According to one popular story, Poe repeatedly mentioned a mysterious name during his final hours, Reynolds. Nobody knows with certainty who he meant. Was it a person, a memory, a hallucination, or something connected to what happened to him? We simply don't know. And that uncertainty is exactly what has kept Poe's death alive as one of America's most fascinating literary mysteries. But there is an important distinction. There is no reliable evidence that Poe actually wrote down a precise prediction saying exactly when, where, or how he would die. The idea that he predicted his own death is largely a legend built from coincidences, strange details, and the dark themes that surrounded his life and work. And perhaps that makes the story even more interesting, because Poe spent his career writing about mysteries that seemed impossible to solve. And in the end, his own life became one of those mysteries. A brilliant writer who made death a central part of his art. A man whose final days disappeared into uncertainty, and a death surrounded by questions that, even after more than 175 years, still have no final answer. Maybe Poe never predicted his own death. Maybe it was simply a tragic coincidence. Or perhaps there are details about his final days that history has lost forever. What do you think really happened to Edgar Allan Poe? Tell us your theory in the comments. And if you enjoy dark history, unexplained mysteries, and stories that make you question what you know, subscribe to Rayazora Info, because sometimes the most frightening mysteries are not fictional. They are real.